Right, today we have Lauren Parkhouse from the Devon and Severn Inshore Fisheries Authority and Conservation Group, so Devon and Severn ISCA, whose office is in Brixham. But we're lucky that Lauren has managed to get back home to live in Westwood House. So she's working, having been brought up in Northam. So she's a really local person and so really knows the estuary and the area well. Lauren did her undergraduate at Plymouth University, and since that she has gone on to do a master's in coastal and marine management at the University of the Western Fiords, which I find intriguing. It's so far, what a place to go to. Her dissertation there was on through the Devon and Severn ISCA and methods of scallop stock assessment in South Devon. Today she's going to talk to us about whelks and the mussel industry around the Tall Torridge estuary. Thank you, Lauren.
My name's Lauren and I'm an Environment Officer at Devon and Severn Inshore Fisheries and Conservation Authority, easier known as the IFCA, and I'm going to talk to you about whelks and mussels today. There we go. To start with, I'll give you a bit of a background of who the IFCAs are in case you're not aware. So IFCAs were formed by the Marine and Coastal Access Act, and they replaced the Sea Fisheries Committees in 2011. And they're the statutory managers of inshore fisheries, both commercial and recreational, out to the 6 nautical mile line. There are 10 regional IFCAs around England's coast, with a shared vision of inshore fisheries and conservation authorities will lead, champion and manage a sustainable marine environment and inshore fisheries by successfully securing the right balance between social, environmental and economic benefits to ensure healthy seas and sustainable fisheries and a viable industry. So as you can tell from that mission statement, we've got quite a balancing act to get it right for both the fisheries and the environment. And this map just shows you the IFCAs around the country. As we are Devon and Severn, that means we cover an area of both coastlines of Devon and all the way up the Severn estuary. So where do the IFCAs fit in marine management? So DEFRA are the overarching control of policy, and then we have the Marine Management Organisation, and they are the statutory fisheries managers from 6 nautical miles out to 200 nautical miles. And they also manage quota and are primary managers and enforcers of national fisheries legislation. And they also manage fishing activities within marine protected areas outside the 6 nautical miles. So then there's the Environment Agency, and they, as well as the other roles, they are also statutory managers for freshwater and migratory fish. And then there's Natural England, who are the statutory nature conservation advisors, and they also advise on marine protected areas, including the location of the features, the condition of the features, and then they sign off on marine protected area assessments that are done within the 6 nautical mile limit. JNCC, the statutory body for reviewing those outside the 6 nautical miles. So the IFCAs, we make and enforce the local fishery bylaws, and as I said, we manage fishery activities in MPAs from 0 to 6 nautical miles. And often the IFCAs, the MMO and the Environment Agency officers are cross-warranted, so we can enforce management measures within our different areas. So the Devon and Severn IFCA, as I said, we cover quite a large area, both South Devon and North Devon, and up the Severn estuary, as can be seen in the grey on this map. So we have quite a large area of sea. We total 4,522 kilometres squared, and have a coastline of 1,314 kilometres squared. And we also have 22 marine protected areas within our district. So each IFCA made up of an authority and then the officers. So the authority sit above the officers, and they make decisions on the information that we provide to them. So the authority are made up of local authority representatives. So these are from the funding councils. So we have a lot of funding councils ranging from Plymouth all the way up to Gloucestershire, as can be seen on the darker green areas on this map. And then there's also 3 members from statutory agencies. So that's the MMO, Natural England, and the Environment Agency. And then there's the MMO appointees. So this is made up of 14 members, and these are from all ranges of the coastal community. So these could be commercial fishers, recreational fishers, people that have interest in the marine environment. So every few years, these are advertised and people can apply for voluntary positions to sit on our authority. And the MMO, they do the interview process. So it's quite removed from the IFCA in that sense, as they choose who sits on our authority. And then we have the officers themselves. So we're made up of 1 chief officer, 1 deputy chief officer, and then we have the enforcement team, and that's 1 senior officer and 5 enforcement officers. The environment team, which I sit on, and there is 1 senior officer, 1 full-time officer, which is myself, and then we have 2 part-time officers. And then we have our office manager, and then a permitting and marine development officer. So they deal with a lot of the marine consultations that come through. So as I said, we've got 22 marine protected areas within our district, which is shown on this map. The darker blue areas, they're special areas of conservation. The red areas are special protected areas. And these were both formed under the EU Habitats Directive, and were previously known as European Marine Sites. And we had 10 of these in our district. We also have 12 designated marine conservation zones, and these were implemented under the Marine and Coastal Access Act. So we have in total in our district those 22 marine protected areas. They cover an area of 1,914 kilometres square, and that excludes the co-location. Quite a few of them you can see from the map actually overlay each other. So 42.33% of the IFCA, the Devon and Severn IFCA district, lies within a marine protected area, and 25% of the IFCA's district is closed to mobile demersal fishing. So this is trawling or dredging. And then we have 58 management measures under our permit conditions that restrict activities within these marine protected areas. So I'm just going to briefly go over how we protect marine protected areas plus manage other fisheries. So when the IFCAs were formed, we had inherited bylaws from the Sea Fisheries Committees, and these had to be reviewed and then also replaced, as many of them were no longer fit for purpose. So at the Devon and Severn IFCA, we adopted a slightly different approach than many of the other IFCAs, and we went down a permitting bylaw approach. And this permit-based approach allows for adaptive and flexible management. We have 4 permit bylaws within our district, so the mobile fishing, the potting, the netting, and the diving permit bylaws. These all have technical measures within the permit conditions, ranging from spatial and temporal closures to gear specifications and minimum sizes. And as I said, this allows for quick response to evolving guidance for management of the marine protected areas, any new fisheries and environmental changes that might come in. And then we review the full bylaw gets reviewed every 5 years. The permit conditions get reviewed every 3 years, but we can make changes if necessary before this time, which is I say a quick process. I think the quickest we can make changes to the permits within the bylaws is about 3 months. However, if you were making a full new bylaw, this can take up to 2 years to go through the process. So it is having the permitting system is a lot more flexible than having just a strict bylaw system. And over 1,000 permits have now been issued within our district to various fishers. So to bring in the bylaws and to make changes to the permit conditions, this first involves doing the research necessary to understand what the current situation is. And that's what the job of the environment team is. This often starts with a literature review to see what is currently available and to see if there's any evidence gaps that need filling. This often will lead to research projects being carried out. And then once this is all this information is pulled together, reports are fed back to the bylaw and permitting subcommittee, and this is made up of members of the authority. And then if there's a need for management measures, now that we have the permit bylaws in place, this will likely be done by changes to permit conditions. So the changes to permit conditions would go out to consultation, and then changes would be sent to the permit holders. And then if we had to do a full bylaw, which would be rare with the permitting system, the bylaw would be written, and then it would have to go to the MMO and DEFRA to sign off on it before it went out to public consultation. And then eventually that information would go out to permit holders. And then this is all enforced by the enforcement team and then also reviewed by the IFCA. So the permitting system is definitely a quicker system for adaptive management. So I've been asked to talk to you today about the research we carried out for the Whelk fishery management. And then I'll also talk to you about North Devon project with mussels after this. So a little bit of background to the Whelk fishery. As you can see here, the main ports for landings are Ilfracombe, Brixham and Exmouth, although the whelks are landed in other ports in North and South Devon. And these are the 2018 figures. And you can see that Ilfracombe is second to Brixham for landing. So this is just Ilfracombe and Exmouth landings, and you can see that there's been since 2015 there was quite a decline in landings of whelks, even though there was still a fishery in progress. So we went from a maximum in Ilfracombe of about 874 tonnes landed in 2015 down to 228 tonnes in 2019. So this whelk fishery can be seen as quite a boom and bust fishery, and there has been a gradual decline. So management prior to 2018, there was no quota in place, no closed season, the minimum conservation reference size, which is also known as the minimum landing size. This was an EU measure and it was 45 millimetres of the shell height of the whelk, and this was inside and outside the 6 nautical miles. We did have the potting permit bylaw in place, which could allow for this adaptive management. And there was a voluntary code of conduct in the Lion Bay Reserve of a maximum of 500 pots and 30 pots on a string. But this was the only management that was in place for whelk fisheries. So there was concerns that this 45 mil wasn't protecting the stock. So CFAS carried out work nationally to see if this was a significant size to protect some of the spawning population. So for this, they carried out a study to give estimates of size of maturity. The size of maturity, also known as SOM, is the size at which 50% of the population is sexually mature. So not all the population, but 50%. During their studies, only 2 samples were taken from the Devon and Severn IFCA district, and these were from Exmouth and Ilfracombe. And from this small sample, you can see that size and sexual maturity for males and females in both locations are a lot higher than what the 45 millimeters would protect. So in Ilfracombe, it was 75.5 at 50%, and the same for the males and females. And you'll notice that there is a slight difference between females and males in Exmouth, and this is quite common. So at the IFCA, we decided from this small results that we needed to carry out more research to see if we needed to bring in changes to management to protect this stock, especially after seeing a decline in the landings. So we undertook this. So we decided that we had 3 aims of our research. This was built on CFAS's study to determine the accurate estimate of size of maturity within the district, and then to assess whether a minimum size was based on a shell width is viable. This is for ease of sorting of catch. When they sort the catch, they use a riddle on the boat, which is a piece of equipment like a big tray with gaps in it. So then they shake the whelks, and any whelks that go through are deemed to be too small. And there were questions about whether doing the landings, the minimum landing size based on length rather than width wasn't helpful for this. And then we also wanted to identify if there was a peak breeding and spawning time. So the first step was to have stakeholder meetings with the industry to get the views on the current state of the fishery and what they would like to change within the management. And then from this meeting, we had 3 skippers that volunteered to help with the data gathering by collecting survey samples for us in Ilfracombe, Exmouth, and also Start Bay. So monthly samples were collected for a period of 12 months, and this was initially from Ilfracombe and Exmouth, but then we also added Start Bay into this. And then the analysis included size and sex stratified subsamples with biometric data collected, including the width and the height metric. And this was both the minimum and the maximum for the width. So on the far left, that is the height of the whelk. So that's what the minimum conservation reference size is based on. And then the other 2 images are the maximum and the minimum width. And then we also assessed the maturity stage through gonadal size for both the males and the females. So this involved pulling out the whelk and dissecting it. So this gives you an indication of the difference between an immature and mature female whelk. So the whelk on the left is an immature female, and if you can see the digestive whorl that has an arrow to it, if you can spot that, it's quite small. So there's no differentiation between the digestive whorl and the gonad. As you can see, it's all a browny colour. And then on the right, we have a mature female, and the gonad is clearly different from the digestive whorl. The gonad is the yellow, and the digestive whorl is the brown. So that one is a mature female whelk. And then for males, it was slightly different. So again, we looked at the digestive well, and on the left you can see an immature male, where the digestive well and the gonads are the same colour, and then there's also an underdeveloped penis. And then on the right you'll see a mature male, and the same with the female. There's a difference between the gonad and the digestive well. This time it's more like a red colour, a brick red colour, and then this is a fully formed penis. So the results. So like I said, we did this over 12 months, and we took 50 random samples from each location on each month. And the results here indicate that SOM was larger than the current management would protect, and it differed between location and sex. So this is Ilfracombe, and at Ilfracombe there actually wasn't that much difference between the two sexes. So the females were 50% sexually size maturity at 76.5 millimeters, whereas the males were at 76.4 millimeters. And if you look at the blue arrow, that represents the 45 mil, which was current management, and you can see that there were not many, well, pretty much zero were size of maturity at 45 mil. So then at Exmouth, the size of maturity was slightly smaller, with 69.3 mil for the females and 70.9 mils for the males. So again, not protected under the previous legislation. And then Start Bay was smaller again, so 57.8 for females and 64.4 for the males. These regional differences could be explained by environmental factors such as sea temperature or anthropogenic influences such as fishing pressure, or a combination of the both. Looking at temperature data for the two regions, it's more likely that it could be the fishing pressure. It is known that increased fishing pressure and adult mortality can lead to changes in population age and size of maturity. So the population gets younger and smaller with fishery selection. Up in the Shetland Isles, the size of maturity there is around 90 mil, and this is more down to the environmental factors. So colder water temperatures, the whelks mature at a larger stage. So this kind of shows the importance of doing regional management and regional research as well. And a lot of the IFCAs around the country have been doing their own whelk research to look at their management measures. And yeah, we are seeing a different size of maturity around the country. So another aim was to identify the peak breeding and spawning times. So these graphs show the gonad index, which shows the average gonad size of mature whelks that change throughout the year. So female whelks landed in Ilfracombe, so these first graphs are Ilfracombe. The gonad indices show a sharp decline between October and November, and they're staying low until February before starting to increase again. This indicates that the spawning takes place between October and November. And then for the Ilfracombe males, the gonad indices show a large increase from September to October, and then a slight increase in the median value between October and November. And then a sharp decline is seen in December, then starting to increase again in February. This pattern suggests that the copulation starts in September and October and continues through November and then declines throughout December. Females are actually able to store the spermatozoa from the males to ensure the best conditions for spawning. So there is often a slight difference in copulation and the spawning times. And these are the results from Exmouth. So the Exmouth females, the gonad indices steadily increased from July to November, followed by a steep drop between November and December, before slowly starting to rise again. This indicates that the eggs are maturing until November, and then copulation takes place, and then peak spawning activity taking place in December. The Exmouth males, the gonad indices increased from July to October before steadily declining to the lowest value in February, then increasing again. And again, this suggests that copulation is likely to begin in October, November, and continues throughout December, and then declines in January. We didn't do this research for Start Bay because of the lack of regular samples. So as I said, the third aim was to look to see if there was a correlation between shell height and minimum width and maximum width. So the minimum width is on the left and the maximum width on the right. And this shows there is a strong positive relationship between shell height and shell width, meaning that as the shell height increases, the width increases at proportionate rate. So it is possible to estimate the shell width for a given shell height. So for example, when looking at the minimum width, a shell height of 55 would be a shell width of 23. So what conclusions and management recommendations came out of this research? So it was clear that the 45mm shell height for the minimum conservation reference size was insufficient to protect spawning stock, and recruitment overfishing might also be occurring in Start Bay. So increasing the minimum conservation reference size would help the fishery to become more sustainable, and a minimum size based on shell width might simplify the sorting of large catch quantities, or be used as guidance to set the riddle width. And there was a potential for a closed season during times of peak reproductive activity. So going forward, so they were the recommendations. Going forward, the management measures that were actually introduced. The authority decided to increase the minimum conservation reference size in a phased approach in 10mm increases, and this went up to 55mm in 2018, and then 10mm in up to 65mm in 2020, and that so 65mm is now the minimum conservation reference size within our district, but it is still 45mm outside of the 6 nautical miles. That's not our jurisdiction to bring in the changes. So the reason we decided to go up in these increments was to reduce immediate impact on the industry, as a 20mm increase in one go could have had negative impacts on having a viable fishery. For the relationship between shell height and shell width, it was decided just to give guidance on this rather than bringing anything into the legislation, because it would be hard to enforce different riddles on different boats. So again, we just provided this guidance and let the fishers know what width would be the right length, if that makes sense, so that they could retain their catch correctly. So further work, we didn't bring in anything for the spawning season. For this, we had to take into consideration the seasonality of the fishery. So from landings data, it's clear that in Ilfracombe, the whelk fishery is very valuable over the winter months. And in 2017, the highest landings were in January. Therefore, a closure at this time of year may have a strong negative economic impact on the fishery in the local area. So there's possible review of the spawning period and gather more data if we feel this is necessary in the future. But we need to see what the difference the current management is, what impact the current management is having before we make any more changes to the management. So we also undertook a fisheries research and management plan for whelks. So as part of the North Devon Marine Pioneer, the IFCA and the North Devon Biosphere have produced an initial series of fisheries research and management plans for 5 commercially important species or species groups in North Devon. And we're also now carrying these out in South Devon. So the Whelk fisheries research and management plans aim to bridge the gap between the current species-focused fisheries management and look at a more ecosystem-based approach at an appropriate scale. It provides an ecosystem-based review of the ecology, fisheries and management of whelks within the North Devon Marine Pioneer area. And this approach integrates local and historic knowledge via stakeholder engagement with scientific research outcomes, building the knowledge base for a sustainable ecosystem-based management, and highlighting current knowledge gaps to inform future research. So all the plans and summary documents for these are available on the website, and the research gaps that were highlighted might hopefully be picked up by other research as well as possible in-house future research. So I won't go into any more details about these, but all the plans are available on our website. So I'll now go on to the Torridge mussel fishery. So the Torridge estuary is an important site for wildlife and has been designated as a site of special scientific interest for overwintering and migratory populations of wading birds and for rare plants found on its shores. Bloom mussels are present in the intertidal and subtidal areas of the Triple SI and provide a food source for the wading birds. And there's also a mussel fishery operating in the estuary. So just to give a bit of a background about some of the why we've been carrying out some of the research. Following the loss of mussel between 2013 and 2014 across much of the UK, there was an increase in industry from numerous commercial harvesters to come to the Torridge that had also seen a decline in stock, to remove seed mussel to then lay this on in other areas. But because there'd also been a decline within the Triple SI, which was thought to be due to the severe winter storms and poor settlement, it was clear that management would need to be brought in quite quickly to stop even more of this mussel being removed. So Natural England, they are actually the regulatory body for Triple SIs. So working with ourselves, we introduced management measures to ensure that there will be enough mussels to provide adequate food supply for the birds for which the Triple SI is designated. So these management measures, because it's a Triple SI, it's difficult to bring in firm management. So this was more that you could be, if you were seen to be damaging the Triple SI, you could be fined, I think it's up to £20,000 under the Wildlife and Countryside Act. So letters were sent out to everybody that had expressed interest in removing mussel to let them know if they removed mussel that weren't under these guidelines that I'm about to tell you about, this could damage the Triple SI, which could result in a fine. So it was decided that the measures would include Initially, no more than 500 kilograms total to be removed per month. So this wasn't per fisher, this was total for the whole estuary between all people that wish to remove mussel. And any businesses wishing to remove mussel must notify Natural England and the IFCA of their intention to do so before the 23rd of each month prior to the month when mussel harvesting is proposed. And records of the amount of mussel removed, including location, together with copies of the movement documents, were to be submitted to Natural England and ourselves within 14 days of harvesting. So if businesses did not comply with this, then it would be seen that they were potentially harming SSSI and could face a fine. So these management measures actually put off people from coming from elsewhere within the country to remove mussel, but the mussel fishery, the local mussel fishery, has continued within these rules. So this diagram, so going on to our surveys that we use to bring in these management measures, this diagram shows the area of mussel where beds are surveyed in, so this was the 2021 survey, and all sites, so all the orange areas, except for the area known as the neck, have been surveyed annually since 2012, and the neck was surveyed in 2021 and 2020, but we couldn't get to it in 2022 because of the change in the estuary. So to determine the coverage and the patch density of the mussel beds, we carry out a method called the Dutch wand method. And the Dutch wand, don't actually have an image of it. It's basically a bamboo stick with a bit of drain pipe attached to the bottom, which might sound a bit bizarre, but it is an internationally recognised method for carrying out mussel surveys. So basically, transects are carried out zigzagging across the beds, as you can see from this diagram. And then every third swing of the Dutch wand, you place it down. If there's mussel in there, you say hit. If there's not, it's a miss. Sorry, I'm just having issues with my computer. There we go. It's a miss, and each hit and miss is recorded, and every fifth hit, we take a sample, and we have the GPS location of this sample, and then all mussel sample from the same transet collected together in one bag and kept separate from those from other transets. And once all the transets are completed, with GPS location start at the start and end of the transet, the mussels are sieved and cleaned, and then we measure each mussel, and then they're divided into 7 size groups with increase of 10mm increments, with the smallest group being 1 to 10mm, and then each group is weighed. So then with this data collected from the transets and the samples are used to calculate the percentage cover of the mussels, which is equation 1, the density of the mussel cover, which we use equation 2 for, and the area of the survey. The area of the survey generated by a minimum convex polygon around the transit line, which are then used to estimate the mussel tonnage of each site, which is equation 3. So Natural England have provided us with a mathematical model that allows us to estimate the ecological requirements of the wading birds feeding on the mussel in the area. And then using this model, it's possible to calculate the tonnage of prey-sized mussel. So prey-sized mussel is between 30 and 60mm. So we can calculate the amount needed to sustain the bird population, and then compare this to the overall tonnage of the prey-sized mussel on the surveyed beds, and then estimate the total mussel available to the fishery. So the mathematical model includes several parameters that can be changed yearly to reflect the changing conditions of the estuary. So The results of the 2021 survey, these are all the locations that I showed you on that map combined. We do break down each location as well, but I'll just talk about the overall area of the estuary. So overall, the total tonnage of mussel stock in the survey beds within the estuary appears to remain relatively stable between 2017 and 2020, despite the addition of new survey site, the neck, containing dense mussel coverage in 2020. In 2021, the total tonnage of mussel across the estuary and the estimated area of the bed has increased by more than 50% and 37% respectively of the 2020 levels. So that's the top figure shows this. And then both the average density and the percentage cover of the mussel has increased as well since 2020. The density and percentage cover of the mussel across the estuary is now more similar to the value seen in 2019 and the years prior. So this is the middle figure. And then all size classes of mussel above 30 millimeters are shown an increase in tonnage across the estuary compared to the 2020 levels. And this suggests that while older mussel is continuing to grow, there's not been as much new settlement or recruitment in the last year. However, the report that's currently being put together for this year may show changes in this, as when we went to the beds in May, there was still the larger mussels, but we had to go back to the beds in August to redo some areas, and there was a lot of spat seen across the beds, with a lot of this being under about 20 mil. So the 2022 report will likely show some changes within this size class of the estuary. So with the ecological requirements for the birds and the local fishery, the mathematical model has projected that the amount of mussel needed for the prey size mussel needed for the birds was 815 tons, and this leaves around 459 tons potentially available to remain on the beds and support the fishery. So given this this increase in available mussel, it was decided to increase the amount that could be taken each month to 750 kilos. This is something that we will review annually, and if needs be, we will bring this number down again. So from the intertidal surveys, it's recommended that we continue doing this on an annual basis. And then we also might look at the maybe doing biannual surveys due to this year's survey showing that there was a change between May and August, but this will all be down to resources and time constraints. So this is something that's a possibility. I realise I've been talking for quite a long time now, but I just want to cover the subtidal mussel surveys before we have a break. So this is a new survey that's been carried out since 2020. So there was some local concern that the subtidal mussel beds may be prone to scouring and breakdown over the winter. As I'm sure you all know, up here we have a large tidal range. And if this coincides with high freshwater input and winter storms, this could lead to a lot of loss of mussel, especially around the estuary mouth, so the Pulleys area in particular. So there was interest in 2020 from the fisher in possibly removing some of the subtidal mussel before the winter storms to relay this on the intertidal beds further up the estuary towards Yelland, in more protected areas to grow onto harvestable size and to develop the current fishery. As I said in our my original bit about what the IFCAs are. We do look at promoting viable, sustainable fisheries. So it was decided that a pilot would be carried out in 2020 to remove 5 tons of this mussel from the subtidal, with a pre-survey undertaken using broad-scale grabbing to understand the extent of the local extent and location of the subtidal beds. This information, from the survey, was fed into an assent given by Natural England to relay the mussel, because again, because it's SSSI, this is something we worked closely with Natural England on. But we decided for future management, a more extensive survey was needed in 2021. So we worked with a local fisher and Cornwall IFCA to carry out a side scan sonar and grab survey of more of the estuary. So we used a side scan towfish that was deployed from the fishing vessel. We established the plan as we were working using the local fishers' knowledge. So then using the side scan sonar, you do transects up and down the estuary, and then the feedback that comes from the side scan sonar is then processed, and then it can be mapped. And then from that, we planned a ground truth survey using a grab for the next day. So the side scan produces a signature, and you have to determine what that signature is. So we had a signature that we felt was probably mussel from I'll show you on the next slide of what it looks like. So then we noted these areas and would go back with a grab to see if this was mussel or not. So this is an example of the signatures that you receive back. So this is just a small area of a couple of the transects. So if you look in the zoomed in section, on the left of the zoomed in section, it's kind of bumpy looking in texture with light and dark. And this is what we felt would be mussel. And then if you look on the right hand side, it's a lot smoother. And that was thought to be sediment. So part of side scan sonar, you have to, if it's a new signature, you have to go out and do the ground truth thing to make sure what you think is right is right. But you don't do this over the whole area, you pick certain areas to ground truth. So a total of 45 stations were identified to ground truth with a grab. So the grab you can see on the left-hand side there. So that was also deployed from the fishing vessel. Once you get on the mark from the GPS location, this drops to the seabed, and then the mouth of the grab shuts, and then this brings up whatever's on the seabed. So in this case, in the middle image, that's mussel within the grab's mouth. So again, we use the same process as the intertidal survey so that we could compare the subtidal to the intertidal. So these were all bagged and measured in the same format. And then length distributions could be plotted as histograms and empirical cumulative distribution functions, and could be compared to the 2020 grab surveys and the intertidal surveys from 2021. So in total, 89 grabs were carried out. This includes repeats for grab failures. So quite often the grab won't hit the seabed correctly and will come up empty or just full of water. So of the successful grabs, 65% of these contained mussel. We also deployed a camera in one area just so we could look at the density of the mussel. And we could see from the camera that there was sand in between dense mussel, and this gave another level of evidence to the side scan sonar signature. So from the grabbing and the camera work, we knew that the signature was correct. So that meant we could then map all the areas that we had used the side scan in. So On this map, all the pink areas are thought to be mussel and the orange from the side scan sonar, and the grey areas are they're the intertidal beds that I discussed earlier. So using this method, we got in 2 days, we managed to get a clearer picture of what's happening with the subtidal mussel in the estuary. So the results from this survey, the first graph, that's the size frequency distribution of mussel from the 2021 GRAB surveys, and it's indicative of at least 2 age classes, and there's a clear bimodal distribution of mussel length with peaks about 12 millimeters and then again at about 55 millimeters. The second graph, so this is the empirical cumulative distribution function graph. Sorry, that's quite a mouthful, so I'll just call it the ECDF for now. So this distribution of different cumulative mussel lengths along different geographical areas within the estuary. So this shows we split the estuary into 4 areas. So there was the estuary mouth, and then which encompassed most of the Pulleys bed, and then I go back one graph. So I don't know if you can see my arrow, but the estuary mouth was from this end of the Pulleys out, and then we had inner Pulleys to Sprat Ridge, and then lifeboat slip to Coolstone, and then Yelland. So the graphs show that the stations closest to the estuary mouth had smaller mussel, whereas stations further up the estuary, the mussels were larger. And the area between Inner Pulleys and Sprat Ridge shows evidence of bimodal distribution of the mussel size. So this is the double dip in that graph. So the top graph here, this overlays the 2021 subtidal results with the 2021 intertidals that result. And you can see that the subtidal mussel from the upper estuary were larger than all the intertidal beds, and the intertidal beds at the Pulleys was the only bed to show some evidence of this bimodal distribution in mussel size that we saw in the subtidal, but it was less pronounced. And then the bottom graph, this compares the subtidal areas from 2020 and 2021, and the grey is the 2020 and the blue is 2021. So you can see that the size classes have got bigger between the 2 years. And that bimodal distribution that was seen on Inner Pulleys to Sprat in 2021 wasn't seen in 2020. So part of the aim was proof of concept for using a side scan sonar to undertake subtidal mussel extent surveys in the estuary. And this provided a good signature on mussel beds, which was confirmed by the grabbing and the camera. And the survey backed up local fisher knowledge of where the mussel was thought to be. So this kind of shows the importance of listening to local people that are on the ground. And the results, interestingly, have also indicated that there was a likely spawning event and subsequent settlement between 2020 and 2021 surveys. And this spawning may have spilled over from the Pulleys intertidal bed. And so the area around the Pulleys could either be the place where spawning happens, or it could be where it's a good place for the mussels to settle. So another subtidal mussel survey was meant to be happening this month, but unfortunately, due to the weather, this keeps getting cancelled. But there are permissions to carry out this relaying work again, and we're still hopeful that we'll get one of the surveys in before the end of March. So fingers crossed for this wind to die down. So as I said, in August, in the intertidal survey that we carried out, where we had to go back to the bed, there was a large amount of this mussel under 20 millimeters. So if we can get the subtidal mussel survey done, it will be interesting to see if this has spilled over into the subtidal. And then from the fishers' point of view, they felt with the I didn't explain earlier, with the removal of the subtidal mussel to move to the intertidal, they used a small dredge to do this, which has been used in other mussel fisheries around the country. But they're worried that this is actually not the best method, and they feel like it might be damaging the bissel. So when it's relaying, they're not settling properly. So he suggested looking at the possibility of actually removing this by hand from the shallow subtidal and the more exposed intertidal areas. So that's what will be happening this winter. It will be done by hand using forks, in the hope that this will actually help with the reattachment of the smaller mussel up in the more sheltered areas. And I think that's it. Yes. So yeah, thank you.